Good evening, you're watching The Big Story. I'm Olivia Quay with Dylan Ang coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom.
Some 300,000 Malaysians who cross into Singapore daily through the Causeway and Tuas won't be able to do so from tomorrow. This comes after Malaysia's Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin announced an order on Monday night that prohibits all travel abroad. This in an effort to stem the spread of the coronavirus in Malaysia.
Starting tomorrow, March 18th, the restricted movement order will last until the end of the month. During these 2 weeks, Malaysians will not be able to go overseas and foreigners will not be allowed to enter the country regardless of their purpose.
In a Facebook post today, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said that the flow of goods and cargo between Singapore and Malaysia will continue. This includes food supplies.
PM Lee also said he spoke to Mr. Muhyiddin today. They agreed to appoint senior ministers on both sides to coordinate responses to the COVID-19 outbreak, with Senior Minister Teo in that role.
Back home, the Ministry of Manpower announced measures to accommodate workers affected by the lockdown. It is estimated that more than 100,000 Malaysians have no living arrangements in Singapore. So these measures include working with employers to encourage these workers to stay with their relatives, friends or colleagues if possible.
For those who don't have these options, the ministry will also work with some hotels and dormitories to find suitable accommodations. Manpower Minister Josephine Teo addressed these issues when she was on Money FM 89.3 earlier today.
I give a lot of credit to the companies because although the news came to most of the businesses as a bit of a surprise, by mid-morning today we knew that businesses were responding quite calmly, quite rationally. They were quickly thinking about, which were the workers that were impacted, that they would have to find alternative accommodation for, and which of the workers they may have to arrange to return to Malaysia for the time being. And then they tapped into their networks. In some cases, they called up hotels. In some cases, they called up dormitory operators. And in others, they reached out to their employers and said, and employees, and they said, would you have family members who are able to accommodate you? So I think a lot of credit to the companies, and MOM is also helping them. We've issued an advisory, and we've put up on our website the list of accommodation that they potentially.
Well, joining us now is Song Seng-Woon, economist at CIMB Private Banking. Seng-Woon, the Singapore labour market will be heavily affected by the lockdown across the Causeway. Which sectors and businesses do you think will be hardest hit?
I think the more correct question is which sector and industry will not be affected, indeed, because we are talking about Malaysian workers who come across daily in all industry itself. Obviously, most obvious in the food and services side, but they include all the way up there, the value-added so-called industry in terms of IT, professional services as well. It is really across the whole spectrum of industries that will be affected. Obviously, some more so than others.
Right. How do you see the Singapore government then mitigating the gaps in the workforce?
Short term, it's going to be very challenging, obviously. There are some industries which are obviously more dominated. If you're looking at built and construction industries itself, many of the contractors in there, if you're looking, let's say, renovation work being planned over the next few weeks, you might find that these work will be delayed. You just hope that your aircon doesn't conk out in the next 2 weeks, because many of them have our Malaysian technicians and electricians who cross the Causeway daily as well. It's just as simple as that. But I think more important in the longer term, I think they reinforce the government message about how Singapore should continue to reduce dependency on foreign workers, how we should improve and upgrade on technology, etc. I think this is one good reminder of how or what would happen to Singapore if we were no foreign tourists or more tourists, no foreign worker. This is an example, a snapshot what's happening in Singapore if those wishes actually come true, which it is now.
Well, let's look ahead. Let's look across the Causeway to Malaysia. What does the lockdown mean for its economy? Former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, who steered Malaysia through the 1997 Asian financial crisis, he said, but he expects this pandemic to hit the global economy even harder than in 1997.
Indeed.
So, how do you think the Malaysian economy
no one will escape. I mean, if we look at the broader picture, we are just essentially saying First quarter will be a bad quarter. It's a sharp slowdown itself. If we look at one of the data which we use to proxy global growth, the market purchasing manager indices for the 2 months of January and February itself, according to their estimate itself, global growth went from 3% at the start of the year using the survey data to 0.5% in March, in early February at this juncture. Obviously, things have deteriorated since. If we look at the Chinese economy itself, their 2 months data show probably the economy shrinking by 2% year on year, and economies were growing at 6% at the end of last year. For Singapore, we barely had any growth, so we had a very skinny bone to begin with. So all these news flow negative on a small open economy like Singapore will be pretty bad.
Do you think the Malaysian government then, the measures that Mr. Muhyiddin announced, will they be sufficient in tiding Malaysia over?
Hopefully, sharp pain and recovery later on itself. Malaysia, obviously, economy, down from what it used to be 6+%, 4+% now. With this kind of a shutdown in economic activities for economy, hopefully just for 2 weeks, but no longer than that, they will still manage to squeeze out some growth somewhere. But obviously, the longer and more protracted this becomes a global pandemic and fear remains intact, then the Malaysian economy, like the rest, will also ultimately also see sharper contraction.
Right. Okay. So let's look ahead. I guess let's look beyond Malaysia, beyond Singapore. Global stock markets have sunk again despite central banks around the world announcing a coordinated effort to ease the effects of the virus. So, but at this point, are central banks facing limited options to combat the impact?
Yes, I think whether talking central bank or government in terms of fiscal stimulus, they can only do so much in terms of cushioning the downside of the in terms of a drag on economic activities, but it cannot fight a healthcare crisis itself. What the central bank have done so far, cutting rates and putting more money through the banking system, is just like you and I, our heart pumping blood through our body. The banks is actually pumping liquidity, money through the banking system so that it doesn't seize up itself. But that also means that the system only keeping going. You need confidence to be restored. So these measures doesn't help deal with a healthcare crisis. It deals with a potential financial crisis itself, and hopefully it stays for a financial crisis itself. So obviously much more have to be done to restore confidence. Then we can talk about some sort of normality returning with the lift coming from cheap money, or almost free money, and government stimulus coming in to turn around investment and job creation.
Right. Well, Seng-Woon, I guess the question that we need to ask is how close are we to a global recession, or are we there already?
Well, again, just based on the data that we've got on hand itself, it certainly would say likely the economy contracted in the first quarter. So technical recession means 2 quarters of contraction. That is increasingly looking like a real possibility given how severe the global outbreak of this virus and its impact from travel restriction, etc. as well. Q1 GDP likely to be down year on year. The question is, will it spill over to the second quarter and beyond? And obviously that depends very much on what's happening in terms of effort to contain the virus outbreak and how soon consumer confidence in economic activities can resume on the recovery path.
Thank you for coming on, Seng-Woon, and for your analysis as well. I've been speaking to economist at CIMB Private Banking, Song Seng-Woon. Visit thestraitstimes.com for developments across the causeway. But for the meantime, Dylan, it's back to you.
Our top story today, starting tomorrow, Malaysia will be in lockdown until the end of the month. All travel in and out of the country will not be allowed. Malaysia Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin called on Malaysians to not panic and stay calm. The restricted movement order is part of the government's aim to stem the rising number of coronavirus cases.
The order includes a ban on mass gatherings, including religious, sports, social and cultural events. All houses of worship and businesses are to close, except supermarkets, markets, mini-markets and convenience stores.
All schools and universities will be closed as well. All government and private premises will be closed except those in essential services.
All Malaysians will be barred from travelling abroad. For those who are returning from overseas, they must undergo a health inspection and self-quarantine for 14 days. There will also be a ban on all foreign tourists and visitors.
Joining us now from Kuala Lumpur is Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teo. Thanks for taking the time, Shannon. Now, the movement order kicks in tomorrow. How would you describe this? Would you even call it sudden?
I guess it is quite sudden. We've been hearing word of potential lockdown from Sunday when the health minister said that he would meet with the defense ministry and the prime minister's office on Monday. So people were anticipating that something would be announced. Now that it is gone as far as a restriction of movement order and all that it entails, did surprise some. And in my own personal view, it is quite drastic.
Shannon, what has the public's reaction been to the announcement?
So many who have called for some kind of lockdown or some kind of control measures, especially in light of the escalating number of cases since that whole Tabligh event where one person managed to infect what has become 300 over cases right now. That's about 60% of all Malaysian cases. There has been a lot of outcry for some kind of lockdown, some kind of measure. And so the government has responded and most people are happy that something at least has been done. However, there is a segment of people, especially business owners, who are now worried about how they're going to pay their bills, how they're going to keep their businesses running. Hotels, for example, already have guests in-house. Are they supposed to close tomorrow and just kick everyone out? So these are questions that have not been answered.
Shannon, now this is, of course, Mr. Muhyiddin's first big move as Prime Minister. Weighing the pros and cons of this order, for example, slowing the spread versus economic hits, how much hinges on how Mr. Muhyiddin handles this situation?
So some people have been saying that this is probably the worst time to take over the Malaysian government and that Pakatan Harapan got out just in time. But jokes aside, for Muhyiddin, of course, this is both a big test but also a big opportunity to show his leadership material. Right now, the decision is probably welcomed by most, but the question has been that there has been a lack of information. So for example, I think in Singapore, we've been concerned about whether people can still cross the border to go to work. Apparently you can't. These details were not outlined in his speech, nor was it communicated in the hours after. It had to only roll out this afternoon, and in some cases, it might already be too late for people to put in contingency plans. So I think the policies are being rolled out. Yesterday, a few hours before he announced the restriction, he also announced some economic measures, some stimulus packages. So the plans are there, but it has to be communicated. People have to know what's happening, what they're getting, and then they can react, and we can actually make the most out of these measures. Right now, there are a lot of people asking questions. Can I make interstate travels? Is the banks going to be open? So you still have those kind of questions that are floating around.
Well, thank you so much for your insights, Shannon.
Sure, thanks.
That was Malaysia Bureau Chief Shannon Teo on his country's partial lockdown, which kicks in tomorrow. Let us know your thoughts on it by leaving a comment below.
Malaysia's lockdown announcement caused some panic here, with residents wondering whether supply of food and essential items will be disrupted. This was before PM Lee's statement today that the flow of goods and cargo between the two neighbours will continue.
Following Malaysia's announcement, Monday night in Singapore saw queues at various local supermarkets, with shoppers snapping up food products and daily necessities. Trade and Industry Minister Chan Chun Sing said today that Singaporeans needn't be worried.
He assured that Singapore has made contingency plans for disruption of food supply from Malaysia and has more than 3 months' worth of stockpile if Singaporeans buy responsibly.
In a Facebook post, NTUC Secretary General Ng Chee Meng also urged shoppers to remain calm, reminding them to buy only what they need. In response to the bout of panic buying, NTUC has set purchase limits on certain products, including paper products, rice, instant noodles and eggs.
Well, the outbreak is testing the resilience of Singapore's food security strategies. And to share more on this, we're joined by Science and Environment correspondent Audrey Tan. Audrey, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said earlier today that the flow of goods and cargo between Singapore and Malaysia, including food supplies, will continue. Do you foresee then that shoppers here will calm down?
Yes, I think we are all hopeful that the panic buying will calm down. Many of our colleagues who were at the supermarkets yesterday interviewing shoppers actually found that many shoppers had rushed to the supermarkets after they read the announcement from Malaysia. So now, with greater clarity from PM Lee that the supply of goods and food will not be affected, hopefully people will be more assured that what we have in Singapore is good enough and that no one here will go hungry.
Now, Audrey, this isn't the first time we've seen panic buying here. This time it's coming on the heels of Malaysia's announcement to restrict movement nationwide. What are the concerns of these panic shoppers?
So I think the concerns after the two different panic buying sprees were different. The first panic buying spree occurred in early February after Singapore announced that it will be stepping up its disease alert level from yellow to orange.
Right.
So at that point, a lot of people were snapping up non-perishables like toilet paper rolls, tissue paper, and rice. But right now, what our colleagues saw, the photographers and journalists who were out yesterday saw a lot of people buying fresh produce like vegetables and also eggs and poultry. These are items that Singapore imports from Malaysia. And I think the first panic buying spree, people were probably worried that, they might be in quarantine and will not be able to go out and get food. Whereas this time round, the panic buying seems to be fueled by the fact that, all these items will not be available with Malaysia's announcement. But I think we can all rest assured now that this won't be the case.
Audrey, I'm just wondering, has Singapore's food imports from Malaysia been threatened before?
Yes, I think we need to face the fact that Singapore is a small island nation. We just have 720 square kilometers, and only 1% of our land is actually set aside for agricultural reasons. But because of this, our government is very well aware of Singapore's vulnerabilities to any disruptions in the global food supply chain. So for years, we have worked to diversify our food strategies, and this has helped on a number of occasions. So for example, in 2004, the then Agri-Food and Veterinary Authority banned all poultry products from Malaysia because of an outbreak of avian flu H5N1. And in 2018, the Malaysian government also said that it would prevent the export of seafood out because of peak season and because the monsoon was also affecting yield there. So it is no surprise to us in Singapore that we will be affected by global food disruptions, whether it be things like climate change or geopolitical tensions, or even now with the outbreak of COVID. And so we have quite a robust food security strategy in place, which our politicians have constantly been highlighting now to try to calm people down.
Now, Minister Chan Chun Sing said Singapore has contingency plans. What are they, and are they enough to offset the disruption of our food supplies, not necessarily just from Malaysia?
Yes, so we have a multi-pronged approach to securing our food security. Right. So Minister Chan mentioned that stockpiling is one strategy where, Singapore has 3 months worth of supply of carbohydrates like rice and noodles if Singaporeans were to exercise restraint in what they buy and buy only what they need. But beyond that, we also have other food security strategies, and one of the major ones is food diversification. So we import more than 90% of our food, but we don't just import it from one country like Malaysia, even though it's the closest to us. We import from all around the region and also further afield from as far as the United States or Africa. So I think altogether now we import from more than 170 countries and regions. And other than that, we are also trying to boost our local production. So just now I mentioned that only 1% of our land is set aside for agriculture. But from that 1% of land, we can grow about 10% of our own food. And the government wants to ramp this up to 30% by 2030 by investing in technology, by ramping up our production in certain areas in Singapore. So yeah, these are just some of the strategies that Singapore has to safeguard our food security.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing more with us. That was Science and Environment correspondent Audrey Tan. And please leave us a comment to share your thoughts on the panic buying situation in Singapore.
Now, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, log on to straitstimes.com. And once again, I'm Dylan Ang with Oliver Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.